The Ori games have always felt like something of a big deal. That's in part thanks to the backing of Microsoft Studios, which published both The Blind Forest and The Will of the Wisps, initially as Xbox console exclusives. The shine of that exclusivity drew people to Ori's quality, and by the time the games were released on other platforms, it was common knowledge just how talented developer Moon Studios was. It's a reputation that somewhat betrays the reality that Ori was built by just a couple of handfuls of staff. The studio is small, or it was small, at least to begin with. Today, Moon Studios is pretty sizable for an indie developer, and currently at work on its most ambitious project yet, No Rest for the Wicked, an action RPG with striking visuals, precise combat, and online multiplayer. It's a huge leap for the company, and so as part of this month's IGN First, we caught up with Moon Studios co-founders to discuss moving forward from Ori's success and into the challenging waters of sprawling worlds, fantastical lore, and early access development.
We actually started working on this project right after Ori and the Blind Forest, the Definitive Edition. I always saw Ori as our Mario because it was, even though it was a Metroidvania, the platforming focus was so big in that game, right? That it was like, hey, we made a Mario thing. And then I was really excited about the idea of like, what happens if Moon Studios, right, with our art style and with all of that, if we would take on something like Zelda, right? If we would go down that route.
And Ori 1 was still quite of a small game and a small experience. So we didn't quite feel that we were ready to take on, online multiplayer, PvP, full-blown RPG in 3D, right? Like that is a very, very difficult thing to do as a studio. So we felt that we needed to grow a bit more, we needed to learn a little bit more.
And so we decided to make Ori and the Will of the Wisps, the second game. We always had No Rest for the Wicked in the background, right? And we're kind of like still fiddling with it and tweaking with it and so on. And then ultimately, after Will of the Wisps, like that's where we decided, hey, yeah, let's go now.
Following The Blind Forest, fans were asking for a second Ori game, and Moon Studios realised that a sequel would help them grow and mature. And with that extra experience, the team would be in the right place to finally begin full production on their ambitious RPG.
Ori was hugely successful for us, right? With Ori, when we made Blind Forest, our team was basically, with everything together, like we were around 20 people. Then for Will of the Wisps, because we already worked on Wicked in the background a little bit, right? We grew up to almost 60 now, and now we're about 80, 85 people. It's a whole new era for our studio, for sure.
That whole new era begins with a whole new approach. Thanks to being a 3D game, No Rest for the Wicked demands a very different set of development structures than Moon's previous 2D games.
We built our own engine for it, for the networking of it. We had to re-envision all the art pipelines, all of the asset pipelines. Everything was basically redone from scratch in full 3D. But I think you can draw a lot of interesting parallels just creatively between the Metroidvania genre and Ori games and the ARPG genre. So there's actually quite a lot of similarity in some areas.
I think that training that we got through Ori actually put us into a really unique position to make a game like No Rest for the Wicked, where, hey, there's this fully connected world that now has all these RPG elements and so on, right? Because we went through the paces on that twice. We spent a decade working on the Ori games, doing the really hard things, right? To actually get us into the groove of how we now build a game like this. Where in Ori and the Will of the Wisps, we had this little metagame section called the Wellspring Glades, where there were NPCs there and you could help them out and you could, help them make the Wellspring Glades a nicer place and so on. And yeah, a lot of these things we kind of like, even back then created because we knew we're gonna do this in a much bigger way for No Rest for the Wicked.
Much of what fans loved about Ori is being used as the basis for No Rest for the Wicked. For instance, the mantra of a deliberately designed, interconnected world is something that Moon Studios takes seriously, despite action RPG industry trends pointing to a different direction.
That's what I decided from the start, right? Like there was always this unwritten rule that ARPGs needed to be procedurally generated. And I always doubted that, right? Because if I looked at, the results that we got, right? Like the worlds didn't really feel that different. And to me, level design is really important. I mean, I worked for a decade on the Ori games where everything was about level design. It's feeling super fun to be in that world. I wanted to apply the same thing for No Rest for the Wicked, where I want to handcraft everything.
And while it's all handcrafted, there's going to be a lot that we will be sharing about the end game and different things we're doing there to still make the experience feel varied and different and challenging, even though you're revisiting this handcrafted world.
Crafting that world has been a significant artistic journey, both in terms of No Rest for the Wicked's beautiful visual style and the mysterious lore behind it all. While Moon Studios hopes players will find their fantasy epic feels unique, there are notable literary touchstones.
Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones and so on. That was something that we definitely looked at. It was really about building this Shakespearean tale, right? Because with Ori, you already created these smaller kind of like allegorical tales, right? Where we introduced these characters and somehow still managed to make people really connect with those characters and feeling emotionally attached to them. And this time now it was, okay, let's go from that. Let's go from this almost Disney-esque, Ghibli-esque thing, right? To now let's do an epic fantasy saga with humans where there's all these characters that have their own dilemmas and so on.
I think world building is hugely important for us. So it's having those characters have interesting conflicts and story arcs and ambiguous moral questions that we're dealing with, and making players actually, challenge the players and have them think about, what's right and what's wrong. So it's not like a black and white story where there's this bad guy and there's this monster and they have to defeat the monster, but there's ambiguity, there is shades of gray to the world.
Like people who played Ori kind of like knows what we're doing with our narratives, right? Where we want to tell emotional stories and like stories with memorable characters, right? Yeah, we absolutely went down that route, right? Where there's, that we want you to fall in love with these characters ultimately.
No Rest for the Wicked is a story of significant shifts for Moon Studios. The shift from Metroidvania to action RPG, from 2D to 3D, from Disney-like to Game of Thrones-like. That even extends into the way the game will be released. This time around, Moon Studios is heading down the route of early access.
I think we knew that this is how we wanted to make games. Even back in the Ori 1 days, there was this Ori 1 release, which released on March 11th, 2015. But then we took about a year to do the definitive edition. And during that time, we really were able to interact with the community and see how people play the game. And a lot of the improvements and a lot of the changes we did with the definitive edition came from that interaction with the community. Mm-hmm. And that stretched from Will of the Wisps, from releasing it in March 2020, and then up until November, where we released it on multiple platforms. We did the Series X upsampled 120 hertz version. In that time, we also perfected the game, and we were constantly reviewing all the streams, seeing all the feedback on all the different forums. And that, for us as creators, that really is fun. And this is just why we love this job. This is why we wake up in the morning, is to see how other people play these games, and is to make them happy. And if there's anything that we can improve, we are optimizers at heart. It's, the process of optimization and constant improvement, it's just fun, and it's addictive for us. So we're really looking forward to early access and how we can do that then.
It's currently unclear how Moon Studios plans to use early access for No Rest for the Wicked. Studios that have famously used the approach to great effect, such as Supergiant Games with Hades and Larian with Baldur's Gate 3, have used different strategies in the build-up to a full launch. However, that launch is always greatly benefited by months or even years of player feedback. We'll learn how Moon intends to go about that as part of Wicked Inside, which airs at 9 AM PT on March the 1st. It's clear that Moon Studios has huge ambitions for No Rest for the Wicked. And while it's a project that demands the team heads into uncharted territory, it appears that, at the very least, they have the right attitude towards this bold new swing.
I'm a big believer in allowing the art tell the artist where it wants to go, right? And it just became really clear to me and to the rest of the team that, man, if we do this right, if we actually take all these things and put them together, this could become pretty incredible.
For more from No Rest for the Wicked, check out our deep dive on its combat systems, as well as the trailer with full director's commentary. And for everything else, stick with IGN.